If you enjoy what you hear here today, please consider supporting me on my Patreon page. Every dollar helps, and you get to see content that you won't see here. Chapter 4. The Date, Part 2.
Cadance?
Asked Twilight warily once she had retreated to a safe distance.
Cadance, what are you doing? I'm here to help you, Twilight,
she said softly, taking a step forward.
I'm the Princess of Love. I know what you want, what you need. I'm going to save you. I don't understand. Save me from what? From me,
said a soft voice, and Twilight swung her head around to stare at Chrysalis, who stood with her entire body drooped and her gaze averted.
I told you I would win your heart, but I didn't have any idea how to. I don't know how to create love. So, I went to Cadance and I...
The changeling gagged, one hoof going to her mouth, but she managed to keep her bile down and continued.
I asked for her help. To help you... To help me. Make you realize how much I love you. How happy I could make you. She's been giving me advice this whole time. Telling me what to do on each date. So, all those things you did,
Twilight said slowly.
All the terrible things you did during our dates, they were because I was weak. Because I couldn't do what Cadance told me to.
She turned further away, something that sounded suspiciously like a sniffle coming through her mane.
If I just listened to her, if I left you alone after I walked out on our first date instead of taking you away the next night, then maybe... Wait!
Twilight held up a hoof, a look of horrified comprehension dawning on her face.
Cadance told you to leave me like that? Of course,
sniffed Chrysalis.
That way you'd be more interested in me. She called it playing hard to get. Cadance,
growled Twilight, turning back to the other princess.
Do you see it now?
Asked Cadance, nearly whispering, a serene smile on her face.
She doesn't love you. She can't. Look at how easily she threw away her supposed love. How easily she listened to what I told her and hurt you.
Cadance took another step forward and held out her hoof.
Come here. Come to me and this whole nightmare will all be over.
Twilight gave her a furious glare, eyes tight, then spun around to march back to Chrysalis's side.
Don't you turn your back on me, Twilight,
said Cadance warningly, but the pony just ignored her.
Chrysalis?
Twilight spoke gently, reaching out a hoof only to pull it back at the last second.
Chrysalis, are you telling me that every time you insulted me, every time you ignored me, or said something cruel, when you left me during our first date, that was Cadance telling you to do those things? Of course.
Chrysalis gave Twilight a quick glance, eyes wet, then turned away again.
She was trying to help me, but I couldn't. No! Chrysalis, no! Cadance was lying to you!
She threw an angry look over her shoulder at her sister-in-law.
I don't know why, but she was. You don't make a pony love you by pushing them away and hoping that makes them want you more. You make them love you by doing exactly what you are trying to do. By sharing your love with them. By showing them how much you love them by treating them with kindness. Then... You mean...
Chrysalis turned to meet Twilight's eyes, her own wide.
When I left you at the restaurant on that date and you wrote me that letter, I meant every word in it. I was furious. What you did was horrible, and I wanted nothing to do with you after that.
Twilight, eyes wet, mouth trembling, met the changeling's gaze.
But then you took me on a date to the Camelot Library, and then a used bookstore. The same way my mother did with my father. That wonderful, amazing night. It was a fluke,
Spat Cadance.
She did it by accident. She doesn't love you, Twilight.
Twilight glanced at the look of understanding slowly growing on Chrysalis's face, then turned to Cadance.
Are you telling me,
she said in a low, angry voice,
that everything Chrysalis did that was kind and sweet and caring, that was all her? And those terrible things, leaving me behind on dates, insulting my outfits and hairstyles, that was you lying to her? Cadance! I wasn't lying to her, Twilight. I was showing you the truth. That is what she's really like.
Twilight dismissed her again, turning back to focus on the changeling.
So, when you ditched me on that date, you never wanted to? Of course not,
gasped Chrysalis.
Why would I ever not want to spend time with you? All those times you ignored my suggestions about where to go on dates? Mostly her idea.
Chrysalis gave a weak smile.
You know, I actually wanted to go to that museum last month, too. They had their first exhibit with an artist who was out as a changeling. The dance contest?
Asked Twilight breathlessly.
Where you took a stallion as your partner because you wanted to win? The only thing I wanted, more than anything else, was to dance with you,
said Chrysalis softly, running a whole hoof through the pony's mane.
And when I beat you in the dance contest and you set the building on fire?
This time Chrysalis turned away, clearing her throat uncomfortably and refusing to meet Twilight's eyes.
No, that one was all her,
said Cadance from behind them.
Not that I tried to stop her, mind you. And it's a bit disingenuous of you to say beat her in that contest, Twilight. Just because she got disqualified before you did doesn't mean you won. So, all this time,
said Twilight slowly,
everything you did that seemed mean or cruel or uncaring, that was because you love me? Because you were following Cadance's fake advice to try and get me to love you? I just wanted you to love me so much, Twilight.
Chrysalis's voice was low and hoarse.
I'd do anything for you. And I guess that's why I was foolish enough to let her trick me so easily. Do you hate me?
Twilight's response was to wrap her forelegs around the changeling and, forgetting her alicorn strength, squeeze so hard she would have hurt any other pony.
Oh, you are just the sweetest thing!
She cried, burying her face in the shocked changeling's mane.
I'd never hate you. Not for something like that.
Chrysalis stared down at her, then slowly raised a hesitant hoof to drape it over the pony's neck. They pulled back, looking at each other, but before either of them could speak, the sound of clopping hooves interrupted them.
Well, bravo. She knows the truth now,
said Cadance happily.
But why don't you tell her the whole truth, Chrysalis?
Chrysalis froze up, her body stiffening around Twilight.
Chrysalis, What does she mean?
Instead of responding, Chrysalis slowly removed her leg from around Twilight and slunk away, head down.
Chrysalis, please. Oh, come on, Chrysalis,
Cadance said teasingly.
Why don't you tell her what you told me? Tell her why you didn't decide to marry her until after she became a princess.
Twilight gasped, causing Chrysalis to flinch and shy further away. The pony turned, taking a step towards the changeling. Her mouth moved, trying to form words, but none came.
Oh no, nothing to say?
A giggle came from Cadance.
Come now, Chrysalis. Tell us how a simple unicorn who lived in a library wasn't good enough for you.
A dead silence filled the air of the restaurant, none of the ponies moving.
Chrysalis,
said Twilight finally, then licked her lips, cleared her dry throat, and tried again.
Chrysalis, you can tell me. Please. I won't be mad. I just want to know. The hive has to be safe,
said Chrysalis hoarsely.
It has to be strong. So my mate must be strong. You were strong, Twilight Sparkle. Brave, intelligent, beautiful. But you weren't strong enough. You weren't a leader. And when it came to the hive, to my children versus my heart, I did what I've always done. What I have to do. What's best for the hive. No matter how it hurt my soul, no matter how it killed me inside to have to turn my back on you.
She raised her head, trying and failing to smile.
I thought my heart would burst when I heard you became a princess. That I could finally combine my duties and responsibilities with where my heart was leading me. The only thing that's ever made me happier was when I thought you had accepted my proposal.
Chrysalis trailed off, and Cadance let out a snort.
There you go, Twilight. The truth. If you weren't a princess, she wouldn't have given two bits about you. You're nothing more than a safety net. Someone to deal with all those ponies that come seeking justice from her. Someone to swat them away like they're nothing more than pesky flies.
She sneered at the pony, whose head drooped and now faced the floor.
How do you feel now, Twilight? Still think a changeling can actually feel love? I'm so sorry, Twilight.
Chrysalis managed to get out, her voice a husk of its usual self.
I'll just leave.
Twilight, with her head still down, started shaking. Princess and Queen stared at her. And then, suddenly, she threw her head back, laughing uproariously.
That's the best you can do.
She chortled, tears streaming down her cheeks.
Do you really think I don't understand duty? That I don't understand responsibility and sacrifice? I may have only been royalty for a few years, but give me some credit.
She got down on her haunches, gently lifting Chrysalis's chin with one hoof to look her in the eye.
Chrysalis, I would never, ever ask you to put my happiness above that of your hive. Even if it meant 1,000 years of bliss for the two of us, I wouldn't see one single changeling be hurt. It may sound a bit cold, but putting your hive first was the right thing to do. You can't be serious.
growled Cadance through clenched teeth. Chrysalis stared at Twilight, face unbelieving, then squeezed her eyes shut with a happy smile, a single tear leaking out.
I always knew you were the one, Twilight,
she whispered.
Are you kidding me?
Cadance yelled. She stomped one hoof on the ground, the shockwave interrupting the two.
Twilight Sparkle, you cannot actually tell me you love that changeling!
Twilight gave Chrysalis her hoof, helping her back to her hooves.
I don't know if I do or not,
she said, missing the look Chrysalis shot her as she turned to face Cadance.
But what do you think you're doing here? Why are you trying to force us apart? And with such dirty tricks! How could you do this to me? I'm doing this for you, Twilight,
cried Cadance desperately.
I'm trying to save you. She doesn't love you. Why do you keep saying that?
Twilight shouted back, stomping her own hoof.
You heard what she just said to me. You've been spying on all our dates. You had to force her to be mean to me. What about all the awful things she did? She set that building on fire. She laughs when she sees other ponies get hurt. She dismisses ponies she thinks are lesser than herself and insults them constantly. But she doesn't do any of that to me, Cadance. She does love me. And I don't like seeing her be so mean to other ponies, but she's working on it. For me. Because she knows I don't like it, and no matter what you say, she loves me.
Cadance was shaking, head down and teeth clenched. Suddenly, her head snapped back up.
What about the park, Twilight? She pushed you in the fountain and tried to drown you. What?
Twilight's frown of puzzlement turned into comprehension.
Oh, do you mean that night we went strolling in Camelot Central Park? And she pushed me in the fountain and we roughhoused for a bit?
Twilight giggled, sharing a smile with Chrysalis.
That was just a bit of fun, Cadance. I dunked her quite a few times myself. But you were so scared after that you couldn't even leave. You thought she'd hurt you if you tried. Cadance, I stayed with her because I was enjoying myself. We spent the whole night talking.
She gave Cadance a puzzled look.
You were listening. How did you not pick up on that? You got a cold because of her.
Twilight chuckled.
Well, that was my own fault. I got so caught up in talking to her that, well, I didn't even think about drying myself off or getting somewhere warm.
She looked over at Chrysalis, who smiled back.
And this big sweetie came to take care of me. Twilight, she force-fed you meat.
Twilight's expression turned sour, and Chrysalis turned away, whistling a few innocent notes.
Yes, well, it was really nice of her to feed me soup while I was sick. I really wish she had told me it was chicken soup before I'd eaten most of it. Old changeling folk remedy,
cried Chrysalis desperately.
Chicken noodle soup is very good for the colds. Don't you see, Cadance?
Pleaded Twilight.
She loves me. There's no tricks this time, no invasion. It's just love. It's not, Twilight.
Cadance's breathing was ragged as she stared at the two standing side by side.
It's not love. It can't be. Changelings cannot love, period. How can you keep saying that? You've seen Chrysalis with me. You've heard what she says. You know how she acts around me. You've even talked to her in private about her love for me, and you know exactly what you've put her through over the last 6 months. Chrysalis put aside her pride to ask you for help, and even when you tortured her by making her do things that went against what she believed in, she kept it up because she thought that's what she needed to do to earn my love. How can you not call that love? Because changelings can't love, Twilight,
said Cadance desperately.
They just plain can't! Ponies give out love, changelings eat it. It's one way. It can't go backwards. Why not?
Thundered Twilight, and Cadance gasped at her in shock.
You should know this better than anyone, Cadance. There's no limit on love. The fact that changelings need more of it just means we need to give them more. And we should cherish what they give back.
Cadance took an unsteady step backwards, shaking her head in a simple, flat refutation of everything Twilight had said.
You're wrong, Twilight. You're wrong. And I'm doing this. I'm doing this for you. Don't you understand that? You never asked for this. It was all a misunderstanding. It was all a misunderstanding, wasn't it? Maybe she tricked you, maybe she didn't. It doesn't matter now. Just leave her. Come over here to me. She said herself she'd agree with whatever you decided, so make the right choice and come to me now. I don't know if it is the right choice, Cadance,
said Twilight softly, and the princess flinched back like she'd been struck.
I don't know what the right choice is now. You've poisoned everything. So much, I can't see anything clearly anymore. I did what I had to, Twilight. She's not right for you. You shouldn't be in love with her. It's not right. That's not for you to decide. Love comes from what one pony feels for another, not from the decision of some third party. What gives you the right to decide that for me? For anyone?
Twilight knew those words were a mistake as soon as they left her mouth. Cadance froze, then drew herself up to her full height. Her eyes were wide and cloaked in shadow as she lifted her head, and her mane fell down over her forehead, but her pupils were heavily focused pinpricks.
I am Princess Miyamura Cadenza, the Princess of Love,
she said in a proud, cold voice.
I am love. I decide which ponies get to love each other and which ones don't.
She spat the final word from her mouth like it was something foul.
Cadance,
said Twilight, careful to keep her voice calm as she retreated one hoof step at a time, using a wing to nudge Chrysalis along with her.
Cadance, that's not how being a princess works, and you know it. You were one of the ones who taught me, remember? Isn't it, though?
Cadance asked cheerfully, beginning to pace side to side.
Princess Celestia decides when the sun rises. Princess Luna decides when the night falls. Why shouldn't I get to decide who loves whom? Because love isn't predictable. It doesn't appear and disappear at the same time every day. It doesn't follow a cycle. Well, maybe it's time it did. Maybe it's time it was regulated. That it was given to those who deserve it, and taken from those that don't.
Cadance's eyes moved from Twilight up to Chrysalis.
And who better to start with than the Queen of the Changelings? You can't,
objected Twilight in a terrified whisper.
Why not? I can bring out the love two ponies feel for each other.
Her grin turned into a sneer.
So who says I can't put it back? Who says I can't take love away when I see fit? She's a changeling, Cadance. She needs that love to live. You'll kill her! Oh, don't worry. I'll leave her just enough to let her crawl back to her little cave.
Cadance's smile reappeared, mocking now.
Besides, I'm not going to take away all our love. Just whatever little delusions of love she might have for you. I forbid it,
declared Twilight. She stood up straight, her horn glowing, and a magenta dome formed over Chrysalis, leaving the changeling blinking at the brilliant, coruscating light surrounding her.
Is this really what it's come down to, Twilight?
Asked Cadance softly.
Are you really going to raise your horn against me? When all I'm trying to do is help you? When all you have to do is just walk away, and no one will be harmed? I don't want to do this, but you are forcing me,
growled Twilight.
I won't let you hurt my friend.
Cadance stared at her for a long moment, then let out a dreary sigh and turned away.
Maybe you're right, Twilight,
she said, voice barely audible.
I am the Princess of Love after all. I don't even know if I can take love away. Even if I can, I probably don't even have an enemy. My purpose is to give love, not take it.
There wasn't even time for Twilight to let out a sigh of relief before Cadance spun back around, jabbing her hoof at Twilight.
So let's give you some love,
she bellowed. Twilight cried out as Cadance's magic gripped her body, canceling out her own spell and making the shield around Chrysalis pop like a bubble. The magical aura dragged her across the room, knocking tables aside as she went, forcing the pony to raise her forelegs to protect her face. She traveled a dozen feet before reaching Cadance, and she was suddenly launched into the air and hung there, above Cadance's head, struggling in the magical field.
So, who's it going to be, Twilight?
Asked Cadance, grinning up at the pony past her outstretched hoof.
Ready for round 2 with Flash Sentry? Or maybe you want Fluttershy instead? I'd hate to lose the pool to Pinky, but you two would be good together. Although, pretty much any pony at all works. Heck, maybe even a Griffin or two. Just take your pick, and I'll fill you with so much love you'll forget the bug even exists. Cadance, please!
Twilight tried to struggle, tried to cast the most basic of spells, but Cadance's magic had overwhelmed her completely.
Or maybe I should just skip right to Celestia. It's a century or two early, but better safe than sorry. No!
Cadance grinned wider, the glow of her horn ramping up in intensity. Then she suddenly let out a cry as something impacted against her head with a skull-shuddering thump. When she opened her eyes after the momentary shock had passed, she saw Chrysalis, forehead equally bruised, pushed up against her face.
That's my wife you're bucking with,
said the changeling. Her twisted horn, locked with Cadance's, gave off a flare of light, and the pulse of magic threw the princess back into a pile of tables. Turning quickly, Chrysalis caught Twilight in her magic, lowering the plummeting pony gently to the ground.
Are you okay?
She asked softly. Twilight let out a breath and nodded, placing one hoof on the changeling's shoulder.
I am. Thank you.
She suddenly stopped, stiffening and her eyes going wide.
Cadance! We have to stop her! We need to find some way to restrain her before...
She was interrupted by the pile of tables exploding apart, filling the room with a cloud of sawdust. When it cleared, Cadance was standing before them, body glowing as raw magic leaked off her very being.
Another sucker punch,
she said, sniffing dismissively.
Well, what can you expect from the queen of the cheap shots?
She pushed herself into the air, wings spreading wide, and all of the power concentrated itself on her horn.
Let's see how you handle me when I'm ready for you,
she shouted with unmistakable eagerness.
Chrysalis!
Twilight started to shout and move, only to find herself swept back by a hold foreleg.
Get behind me, Twilight!
Cried the changeling, and lit up her own horn. A shield sprang up before them, and Twilight's mouth dropped open. Chrysalis' shield was a wall of interlocking hexagons, a honeycomb of thick magical plates. Each section looked corrupted, holes opening and closing on their surfaces, but the magical signature of the spell was solid. Raw magic dripped off the shield, Magic that should have floated away as fog, but was so heavy it flowed more like slime. And the entire structure shone with a brilliant, beautiful emerald light. Even as Twilight's eyes were widening in awe, Cadance fired. This wasn't some simple bolt from the tip. Her spell came from the entire length of the horn. A thick, concentrated beam of pure, destructive love. It crashed into Chrysalis' shield like a landslide of affection, splattering vicious pink hearts in all directions that slowly floated upwards and faded before being replaced by more. Twilight flinched back from that cataclysm of love, but the shield held like a rock. Chrysalis, though, clenched her jaw and squeezed her eyes shut at the impact.
"You're doing it,"
said Twilight softly, then raised her voice.
"Chrysalis, you're doing it! Keep it up, she can't last forever!" "I can, if you stop distracting me,"
panted the changeling.
"Fools!"
bellowed Cadance, glaring at them from eyes swamped by the pink light of love.
"Do you truly think you can defeat love? That there's an end to the amount of love in this world?"
She lowered her head, amping up her power, and even more pink hearts filled the air.
"It doesn't matter if you want this or not, Twilight! I will fill your heart with love!" "Oh no!"
Cadance's power increase was clearly too much for Chrysalis' shield, and even as Twilight watched it begin to fall apart. It didn't crack the way a pony shield would, but the holes in its surface were becoming more real. A pink gas began to seep in, and she suddenly had to skip aside to avoid a heart that came floating past.
"Twilight, I'm so sorry,"
groaned Chrysalis, now shaking and sweating with the effort of holding the shield in place.
"Please, hold on, Chrysalis. We can... Wait!"
Twilight's eyes went wide as inspiration struck, and she bounded over to the changeling's side, dodging some slowly wavering hearts in the process. She got up on her hind legs, putting one foreleg around Chrysalis for support, and stretched herself up until her head was level with the changeling's.
"Twilight, what?"
Chrysalis started to say, turning to Twilight with fear and confusion in her eyes, but the pony interrupted her.
"Let me help!"
she cried out.
"Use my magic!"
Her horn lit up, magic flowing out to combine with Chrysalis's. The beams twisted together, forming a corkscrew of green and magenta light that grew tighter and tighter, until it merged the shield. As it did, light blossomed once again, and 6-pointed magenta starbursts appeared over the holes in the shield, slowly pulsing.
"We're doing it!"
cried Twilight giddily.
"We're going to... No! I won't let you stop me from saving you, Twilight!"
screamed Cadance. More magic poured out of her horn, flowing down to envelop her body, and the debris scattered about the floor below her began to rise into the air, caught up in the sheer amount of power she was putting out. The lights around the room, powered by magic, first flickered and then dimmed as Cadance's magical field began to interfere with theirs. With another scream, a brilliant nova of light exploded off her body that battered and beat at the shield like waves tossed up by a hurricane.
"We can hold it,"
groaned Twilight, even as her own magic began to falter, the stars on the shield shrinking and letting the magical love gas seep back in.
"Just a little longer."
The shield suddenly began to grow unstable, and Twilight, hearing a rasping sound, looked over at Chrysalis and gasped. The changeling's mouth was open, sucking in the love that was flowing through the damaged shield, and even with Chrysalis's eyes half-lidded, Twilight could see the intensity of the power glowing within them.
"Chrysalis? Chrysalis, stop!"
Twilight tried shaking the changeling, to no effect.
"That's pure love, you can't handle that much power!" "Can't stop,"
said the changeling faintly, with a sluggish shake of her head.
"So much love." need to feed.
The end came quickly and spectacularly. Chrysalis lost all control of the magic she had siphoned, and it surged into the shield, overloading it and blowing it apart in a burst of magical feedback that sent royal bodies flying in all directions. Silence reigned for a moment in the restaurant. Plaster dust drifted down from the ceiling, decorating the circular area in the middle of the dining room that had been swept clear by the blast. A table that had been teetering on 3 legs finally collapsed, and one miraculously intact plate rolled out of the wreckage. Then Cadance stood up.
Do you see, Twilight?
She said, walking slowly over to where her sister-in-law, now barely conscious, lay.
Love wins. Love always wins.
She let up her horn, holding her head high, tears of relief and joy starting to leak out of her eyes.
I saved you, Twilight. I saved...
Her hooves lifted off the ground, her body wrapped in a bright green magical aura. She tried to struggle against the magic, legs flailing uselessly in slow motion. And then the glow intensified and she was held rock still. Carefully, gently, she was rotated onto her back, then turned upwards to face a changeling queen nearly bursting with magical energy.
You are right,
said Chrysalis, voice crackling and jumping with power.
Love does win.
Cadance began struggling, managing some slight movements even against the power Chrysalis now wielded, and she tried to bring up her own magic once more. But she'd given too much of it to the changeling, and Chrysalis suppressed her efforts with ease.
This isn't fair.
Cadance forced out as Chrysalis began carrying her to the other side of the room.
You don't deserve Twilight.
She managed to get her lips up into a snarl.
You tried to steal my love from me. I deserve to steal yours.
Chrysalis, utterly ignoring Cadance's ranting, had been scanning the far wall of the restaurant. Her eyes lit up as she spotted a wide section that was relatively free of decorations or damage. Floating Chrysalis over, she pushed the princess through the wall. Chrysalis spent several moments inspecting the resulting pile of bricks. It didn't look like anything under them would be getting up anytime soon, so she nodded happily and turned away. Taking a deep breath and releasing it slowly, she let the excess magic she had collected flow away and dissipate into the air. Once it was gone, well, most of it, waste not, want not, she thought, with an internal grin, she trotted over to Twilight's shifting body.
Easy there,
she whispered gently, helping Twilight to her hooves.
Are you all right? I think so. Ugh.
Groaned Twilight, rubbing her forehead.
My head feels like the time Pinky thought rock salt was a proper substitute for confetti in her party cannons.
She wobbled, and Chrysalis carefully helped her sit down on her haunches.
I can't believe this,
Twilight said with a sigh.
I never thought Cadance would attack us. Attack me like that.
Twilight suddenly jerked upright, body quivering.
Oh no. Where is she? Is she going to... Shh, Twilight? Relax.
Chrysalis gently stroked Twilight's mane with one hoof.
We're safe. I took care of Cadance. What do you mean?
Stammered Twilight, looking fearfully up at Chrysalis.
I mean,
repeated the changeling, giving a wide, fang-filled grin.
I took care of her. Oh no. No! No, no!
Shaking, Twilight managed to stagger to her hooves. This earned her a disgusted sigh and eye roll from Chrysalis, who simply nudged her with a hoof and sent her back down to her haunches.
As you said earlier, give me at least some credit,
the changeling said dryly, grin now a mischievous smile.
I know what she means to you, even after all of this. And I know how you feel about ponies you like getting hurt, even if they might deserve it.
She gestured at the opposite end of the room, where, on the other side of a roughly alicorn-shaped hole in the wall, a pink leg wearing a dented golden hoof cuff waved from a pile of bricks.
I'm fine,
came Cadance's faint, unsteady voice, and then the ragged hole shed a few more bricks, burying the leg.
See? She's fine,
said Chrysalis, offering a hoof to Twilight once more. Twilight took it, letting Chrysalis help her walk out of the debris she'd landed in and towards the exit.
Oh, what a mess,
groaned Twilight, rubbing at her head with her free hoof.
You know, it's technically treason, or an act of war, to attack a princess like Cadance just did. You only got away with it because we were able to use that foreign wedding customs loophole. Cadance is also a princess, though, which means that law shouldn't apply to her either. That's why Luna wasn't executed after we subdued her with the elements, but... she's officially a foreign princess, an ally, so it does actually apply. Oh, does she have diplomatic immunity, I wonder? She does most of the negotiations for the Empire, from what I understand. Oh, Celestia and Luna aren't going to like this at all.
Chrysalis giggled at her, and Twilight looked up with a frown.
This is all funny to you, isn't it?
Kind of, admitted the changeling.
But I'm honestly laughing at you. It's nice seeing you like this. It's how I want to remember you. Yeah. Yeah.
Twilight sighed, and her whole body just sort of slumped down, even as she stayed upright.
Well, we can let the other princesses handle this. Let's go home.
She started to trot forward, only to find herself stopped by the hoof she was holding. She looked back, puzzled, as the changeling smiled at her.
No, Twilight. What? I mean, I'm not going back to your castle with you. I'm returning to the hive. And I'm not coming back. But...
Twilight dropped Chrysalis's hoof, and the changeling's smile warmed briefly before she turned away.
Twilight, when Cadance asked you if you loved me, what did you say?
Chrysalis asked softly.
I said...
Twilight trailed off, then swallowed and finished.
I said I didn't know. And when Cadance said she was going to remove my love for you, what did you say? I...
This time, Twilight refused to continue, and Chrysalis finished for her.
You said, I won't let you hurt my friend.
She moved back, the small smile still on her face, and stopped in front of Twilight.
Twilight,
she asked gently.
Do you love me?
Twilight paused to lick her lips before continuing in a hoarse voice.
I don't know.
Chrysalis's smile didn't waver.
Then we've answered the question this whole night was about, haven't we?
She started to move away, and Twilight scrambled after her.
Wait, we can try again,
she pleaded desperately.
It's not fair, Cadance. She interfered. You didn't get an honest chance.
Chrysalis paused, then turned back around.
Twilight,
she said again.
do you love me? I don't know,
said the pony, repeating herself as well.
But I want to. I want to try. Do you want to try because you might love me? Or do you want to try because you don't want to hurt a friend?
Asked Chrysalis with crushing finality. Twilight stood there, shaking her head slowly, and all she could do was whisper,
I don't know.
Chrysalis held her smile on Twilight for a moment, then bent forward and gently kissed the pony on her forehead.
Goodbye.
She turned away, moving slowly, but with her head held high, towards the exit. Twilight stared after her, then tried to follow despite her stiff, pain-filled body.
Wait,
she called out, but Chrysalis continued until Twilight called out again.
Wait, please!
They stood there in silence, Chrysalis facing away, Twilight breathing hard. Finally, Chrysalis turned, peering at Twilight out of the corner of her eye.
I'll contact the palace. Get them to draw up some papers annulling our marriage. I'm sure Celestia will be happy to approve them. Chrysalis? Have no fear for your kingdom either,
continued the changeling.
Your hive and mine are allies, now and forever. I'll send a team of changelings to be diplomats in my stead. If you ever need anything at all, let them know. And we will do all that is within our power to meet your desires. Except one thing. You can never contact me again.
Twilight's eyes widened, body stiffening in shock.
No, Chrysalis! I will retire to my quarters and direct the hive from there,
Chrysalis said, heedless of Twilight's protest.
I have no plans to ever leave that chamber. The hive mind can be directed unconsciously, though. I need to be awake to monitor it. So one day, perhaps, I will go to the deepest spot of the hive, to burrow down and slumber deep under the earth for the rest of time. Just as Mother did, centuries ago.
She stared into the past with far-off eyes, then faced forward once again and began walking.
Chrysalis, no!
The changeling didn't respond, just continued to walk. The remnants of a plate crunched under her hoof, and she had to sweep aside half a table with her magic. But she kept walking.
Chrysalis, I am telling you to stop!
Shouted Twilight frantically.
If you love me, then you have to come back here and talk to me!
This time, Chrysalis did stop, right at the door to the restaurant's lobby.
I'm not coming back, Twilight. Because I do love you,
she said, not turning. Twilight couldn't tell if she heard tears or a smile in that voice.
And you deserve someone that you can love.
Suddenly, she was gone. Twilight heard the tinkling of the bell over the door, the faint buzz of wings that quickly faded, and then there was nothing. After some time had passed, Twilight noticed that she had raised her hoof, reaching after Chrysalis. She lowered it now, letting her entire body slump down to her haunches and stared at the empty doorway. Chrysalis was gone. Twilight had spent so much time trying to make that happen, all because of a little misunderstanding. All because someone she thought was a monster had turned out to have a heart. She'd enlisted her mentor, her friends, her family, nearly every pony she knew, in an effort to escape the marriage, She'd even gone as far as agreeing to this dating idea, half hoping she could convince the changeling that things weren't going to work out. And now Chrysalis was gone. She'd gotten exactly what she'd wanted.